Hello and welcome to this edition of Eye on Africa. I'm Mariam Saab. Tonight, Germany's chancellor among leaders in Paris for a summit to prepare the launch of the G5 Sahel force, with Saudi Arabia and the UAE joining the ranks of donor nations for the Franco-African unit. Death by social media. 5 children are believed to have killed themselves in Algeria after playing an online suicide game called the Blue Whale Challenge. This after dozens of participants died in Russia before the phenomenon spread around the world. And planting the seeds for a greener future. Refugees laying new roots in Tanzania have set a target of 2 million trees to raise around their camps in the next year. But first, tackling terror in Africa's Sahel region is top of the agenda at the G5 summit. French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting African, European and Arab leaders in Paris to shore up France's 4,000 troops in the region. The French president sought to widen support for a West African force with soldiers from Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger and Chad. Leaders from Europe and Africa have now contributed some 500 million euros worth of pledges, joining the donors, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Well, France 24's James Andre has been covering the event for us in Paris. Here he is speaking a little earlier.
During this press conference, President Emmanuel Macron said he was hoping for the first military results, successes on the ground by the end of the first semester of 2018. Now, a lot of money has been pledged to the G5 Sahel during this meeting. $100 million by Saudi Arabia, $30 million by the United Arab Emirates, 50 million euro by the EU. That was already a promise that had been made, and also 60 million euros, and this is new, by the United States in a bilateral effort. But this is very important because everyone here is hoping that indeed this military operation could pass under Chapter 7 at the UN. That would mean regular funding and more means to fight terrorism in Sahel. All the leaders here insisted on the importance of indeed eradicating this menace as quickly as possible. Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, president of Mali, said that indeed some of the fighters who had been fighting in Iraq and Syria might come back and indeed try and set up operations in this vast desert region, and that it was crucial to manage to regain control over it as quickly as possible. Now, first semester 2018 for the first result. Obviously, in the long run, what Emmanuel Macron is hoping is that France can disengage at least part of the troops it has in the Sahel. For the moment, there are 4,500 men deployed in this area that's as vast as Europe, and an operation that is costing 1 million euros a day to France.
James Andre reporting there for France 24 from Paris. Well, the French special forces have been fighting terrorism in Africa's Sahel region for years, going back to 2013 when soldiers intervened to beat back rebels in northern Mali. We're now going to take you behind Operation Sabre, an ongoing anti-insurgent mission aimed at disrupting terror networks in the region. Embedded with the troops, France 24 journalists Karim Hakiki and Armel Charrière were given unprecedented access to the operation. Here's their story.
The men and women of the Special Forces come here for 4 months. They know how their missions operate, but they need to get used to the terrain, to the climate, and to the vegetation. Anything that could play a role in their missions.
The mission here is to stop those vehicles and to neutralize the threat, not destroy it. That's our priority, catching enemy fighters and using them to retrieve intelligence.
The drill involves capturing a terrorist fighter. The man has dropped his weapon and has surrendered. He must now be interrogated and have his identity checked. A few meters away, using his radio, the section chief checks each soldier's abilities. In just a few days, these tasks will be carried out during real missions. In the desert north of the Niger River, the training exercise continues. The hunt for terrorists is based on intelligence that is collected. Commandos are flexible and the chain of command is short, so everything can change in the blink of an eye. Operations can be prepared for weeks or launched in just 1 hour.
These patrols intervene at the forefront of all counter-terrorism operations because they allow us to catch enemies that are becoming harder and harder to apprehend.
For the past 4 years now, the French Special Forces have been carrying out Operation Sabre in almost total secrecy.
Moving on to South Africa, where Pretoria's High Court orders President Jacob Zuma to set up a judicial inquiry, calling him seriously reckless for challenging recommendations by a watchdog in a graft probe against him. Meanwhile, in a second case, a judge ruled that he had abused the judicial process by trying to block a report on corruption, ordering him to pay legal fees. Now, this comes ahead of Zuma's resignation as ANC leader next week, although he's due to stay on as president until elections in 2019. His 10-year term dogged by allegations of corruption, all of which he denies. To Algeria next, where a social media phenomenon that coaxes its participants to commit suicide is believed to have caused 5 deaths in recent days. The victims were children between the ages of 8 and 13. The Blue Whale Challenge asks users to carry out a series of tasks over a 50-day period, the final being the most deadly. Since it first appeared online in Russia, the suicide game has been preying on vulnerable users around the world. Pierre Delroux has the story.
The latest victim of the deadly online game, a 9-year-old boy, was found hanging from a rope tied around his neck. In this hospital in Sétif province, eastern Algeria, it's the 3rd case of self-inflicted harm linked to the Blue Whale Challenge in just a few days.
We received 3 victims. A 9-year-old boy who died, another 9-year-old who mutilated himself by carving a blue whale on his arm with a razor blade. Thankfully, we managed to save the 3rd child, a 13-year-old, who tried to drink diesel fuel.
The Blue Whale Challenge began by way of a YouTube video in which an anonymous instructor gives the viewer 50 assignments to complete over 50 days. The daily challenges range from watching a horror movie in the dead of night to self-inflicting mutilation and ultimately committing suicide. The video quickly gained traction, especially among preteen and teenage viewers.
Parents must be aware of what games their children are downloading on their smartphones and playing it online. If they see the kid becoming introverted and antisocial, it could be one of the game's challenges.
In the past 12 days, 5 children with reported links to the Blue Whale Challenge video died in Algeria. Faced with a public outcry, the Algerian government has launched an investigation into the deadly online phenomenon.
To Tanzania now, where refugees are laying down their roots by planting the seeds to a greener future in a new initiative to foster integration and help protect the environment. Over 300,000 people have fled war and poverty in the neighbouring Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi, seeking refuge in the East African country in recent years. The UN's Refugee Agency is now working to help rehabilitate forests by enlisting refugees to help plant trees that will provide fuel for themselves as well as local communities. Clement Bonnereau reports.
Wizeyimana, a Burundian woman, fled insecurity and violence in her country. She now lives in this camp in Tanzania's northern Kibondo district, which opened 2 years ago. She works here as a gardener, tending to seedlings in one of 14 nurseries run by the UN Refugee Agency.
I'm responsible for watering all the trees in the nursery, in particular the mango and pawpaw trees. I make sure they're all watered.
North Tanzania is home to more than 300,000 refugees, mostly from Burundi and DR Congo. The number of the displaced, however, is not the only concern here. Most refugees heavily rely on wood for fuel and construction, which is having a huge impact on local resources. To help offset deforestation, the UN hopes to plant about 2 million trees in and around refugee camps over the next year.
Millions of trees have been cut for the purpose of construction as well as for purpose of energy for cooking. And the nursery is hosting 2 kinds of species. We have timber species and we have firewood species.
All refugees have received training on how to care for the seedlings. They've also been given cooking gas, a safer, healthier and more sustainable alternative to firewood.
Well, the Christmas countdown is on, so let's end on a festive note. A reggae rendition of We Three Kings hit all the right notes at an African-inspired carols concert in Nairobi. Kenya's top artists came together to spread the holiday cheer. The country is still reeling from election violence that left over 70 people dead and disrupted the economy. Let's hear from some of the carols.
Just such great talent, and the way the team reimagined Christmas carols that we hear every day, and just put a very Kenyan twist to it, a lot of humor to it.
It's wonderful that that people still love Christmas so much, even in these days when there's so much turmoil politically. It's wonderful to have such things to bring us all together.
Well, that's all for this edition of Eye on Africa. Do stay with us. Live from Paris continues here on France 24. See you again in an hour.